Good morning, everyone. Guten Morgen, marhaba, goedemorgen. Good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure the coffee had come through. That's good. I also did it in 4 languages, just to remind us that Martin Roth could have done this in 17 or 18, probably. Remarkable cosmopolitan man. Dear Harriet, dear guests, dear colleagues, I am not going to say what culture can do, as we're asked to talk about. And I won't say that because I believe that culture is of people, and it is up to people to figure out together what their cultures, in the plural, can do. But I will try to suggest what the museum can do as a cultural organization, what the museum can do to be a multi-directional portal between its own culture, its communities, and their cultures. So let's go. It's popular nowadays to say that a good museum is one without walls. But of course, there's not really any such thing if you're thinking about the sort of museum that Martin led so brilliantly in Dresden and London, these great Enlightenment institutions that gathered all human knowledge they found worth keeping in the form of the world's objects. That's what they did. And these encyclopedic museums cannot do without walls. There may be partial exceptions, of course, like the great botanical gardens of the world that do this work for plants. But even botanical gardens, here Kew, have walls to contain the tropical plants and climate-controlled herbaria that help them keep the world's vegetal life in some kind of order. And walls are not bad, after all. They support a roof to shelter your collections, they let you hang stuff on them to look at, and they even give you places to draw on in profusion. So when we talk about museums without walls, we are really asking how museums can make their walls more porous, their external walls to the world more porous, to the public for whom these museums were, after all, created, and on whose support they depend. We're asking how museums can go beyond their walls to serve the public better, to enact their public mandate as they have been asked to do. And to stick with the Botanical Gardens for a moment, the New York Botanical Garden in New York City has become quite good at this. While it still presents rare plants as museum objects, it now lets kids touch them and even eat them with its wonderful edible academy. This historically white institution, the Botanical Garden, is actually located in the Bronx, which is a very diverse borough these days. And it now not only does this kind of work with the community, teaching kids and families how to grow food and cook it, it now radiates these kinds of programs out to the many community gardens that exist in the Bronx, in all these different parts that make up the Bronx. And the staff, the Botanical Garden staff there, learn what families, teachers, and business owners are interested in, and they conversely help the communities care for their plants. It's a real exchange of knowledge. So the logic that connects these programs to the Botanical Gardens' mission goes something like this. You might say, why are they out there in the community gardens? They think like this. Kids like to touch things. Kids like to eat. So do lots of adults. Plants are critical to our food security and to our pleasure in eating. Thus, this is a very large stake that these communities have in the Botanical Garden and that the garden has in them, even if none of these visitors ever learned the Latin name of a plant. Imagine that. Martin was a master at engaging public constituencies in this way, in such a way that they wanted to be a part of his museums. He grew annual visitation of the V&A to 4 million people. But that's just the least of it, those numbers. As we all know, he staged exhibitions that were going to be as massively popular as they were innovative in design and technology. David Bowie Is, which ends its great global run of 5 years next month in Brooklyn, is the most famous case. But here are some others. The Fabric of India, one of my favorites, showed how video and craft sessions integrated with the exhibition can help visitors experience the relevance of design and craft history in their own lives, in their own clothes and other textiles. And even if this exhibition might not have been everyone's cup of tea, the year-long display of corsets, underpants, and bras and thongs surely wins the prize for the exhibition that was ever most intimately connected to a visitor's daily concerns. So these shows, I would say, recovered the V&A Museum's original mission, which was to improve the standards of British industry by educating designers, manufacturers, and consumers in art and science. Martin was good at this because he rethought museum visitorship, not in terms of what the museum has to offer from within alone to an audience that it invites in to come and listen to all this, but he thought about what a user might want from a museum. I think shifting the terms of engagement from the visitor, the audience, the sort of somewhat passive person taking up your offer to a user might be a helpful frame of reference. And he loved and rethought the public function of museums in this way. And I'll have a little bit more on this at the end. If museums want to understand what a user might want from it, they have to change the way they think of themselves from being owners of knowledge that gets pushed out to the public to a knowledge institution that meets potential users where they are. They cannot assume that their carefully curated offer is of interest to most people in society today, but have to find a way to have museum knowledge and objects enhance people's experiences in ways that are meaningful to their lives. Figuring out how to do that requires listening to what people are telling you. But it doesn't mean necessarily that you simply give people what they want. This is often the worry of museums, right? It doesn't mean that. There is a lot to learn from libraries in this regard. In the digital age, libraries have transformed themselves from places to borrow books, nobody does that really anymore, to hubs that connect users to knowledge, primarily through the internet and through each other. Libraries offer places for people to connect with each other, for studying, for conversation, for storytelling, for spoken word events, even for making music these days. The silent library is a thing sort of the past, whether you like it or not. And they have expanded their opening hours to accommodate flexible work styles. Museums have not all made the same adjustments yet. 10 to 5 is still a standard opening time for all but the largest museums. But museum education departments in some of the largest encyclopedic museums have been leading the way back to the public user. At the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which is what this slide is from, this is not a library, this is the Metropolitan Museum in New York, any weekday morning, the education spaces are abuzz with kids, parents, and nannies in shared storytelling activities with staff. The point of these activities is not only to talk about art, but to use art and ideas generated by it as things to talk with, even as things to play with. The socialization part is a major draw, with toddlers and kindergartners learning to take turns, or parents observing how teachers coax their kids to try something new for a change. The largest per minute visitor draw to the Met, however, is not any of its storytelling or any of its exhibitions even. It is a semi-annual event called Teens Take the Met. It's like Occupy Met, when 5,000 young people, 13 to 19, invade the Met to go anywhere they want. They make art or music, they enjoy performances, they do yoga, they learn art history if that's what they want to do, they socialize, they dance, and they eat. Food is good to get people to come to places. The whole thing is free, and you don't have to sign up in advance, although you can if you want to. You just show up. It's maximally easy. Many teens become repeat visitors or come to more regular programs at the Met. And the museum doesn't go it alone. It organizes the event together with 40 community-based organizations around the city, many in areas of great social disadvantage and exclusion. And as some of these areas are quite far from the museum and hard to get to, it's hard for the kids to come back to the museum, the Met creates other programs with these organizations that the youth can then access in their own neighborhoods. Other museums are addressing the needs of America's new immigrants. And let me say this loudly on this occasion, since we're all very worried about this, I know. America still has immigrants, lots of them. We will always have them, we need them, and so we ask you please not to take our current government's policies as the majority will of the people when it comes to immigrants. Okay, that was the public service announcement that I think Martin would have appreciated. Thank you. So, okay. The New York Historical Society, great city of immigrants, the New York Historical Society realized that many immigrants who are up for citizenship struggle to pass the citizenship test, which has 100 arcane historical questions on it that you may be asked and that almost no American citizen would know how to answer him or herself. The Historical Society has incredibly rich collections of historical artifacts, images, documents about the history and the government system of the United States, on all of which you can be tested. A year ago, the Society began to offer courses around objects and documents in their collections to help candidates master the material and begin to grasp connections among the questions, the better to remember them as a sort of mnemonic set of devices. By now, almost 1,000 students have taken this course, and of those, 201 from 59 different countries became citizens in April. In fact, they were sworn in at the Historical Society itself, not at that boring federal building, by a very special official indeed, here on the right, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had heard about the program and asked if she would be allowed to. In her remarks, she recalled her poor immigrant father from Eastern Europe, who spoke no English when he came, and she stressed the importance of exercising one's democratic rights and duties, such as voting and serving on juries. The Society then gave the new families a family membership to go along with their naturalization certificates. So I don't often cry in museums, but that was one of those times. Amazing event. The success of programs like this, though, which do not fundamentally depend on new curatorial research, raises the question of the curator's role in relation to the museum user. Historically, collections and curators are what is at the heart of our great museums, not educators or visitors. For much of the 20th century, the museum's core business was acquiring the finest objects, presenting them in galleries and exhibitions, and conserving them for the future, and then buying some more. That collections-focused mission depended on cadres of expert curators and conservators who are indeed fantastic in what they do, who conduct research and maintain a certain distance from the public, and often refer to collections, galleries, and labs as mine, as in my lab, my exhibition, and so forth. And I think that kind of terminology and condition is not a great recipe for imagining the museum beyond walls, unless you take a step back and rethink the mandate of the curator, whose name has its root in the Latin cura, or care. Some museum curators now think of themselves as carers, not just of objects, but of objects that were made by people like us. And by extension, these new curators consider it their task to care also for the relationships people today can have with those objects, and that they can have with each other through these objects, as in libraries. Doing this means caring for one's community, and moreover, for curators to think of themselves as part of the community, and the community not as something that's out there, but something that you're a part of. I see that Michelle is eager for me to wind up, and I will do that. I'm going to skip a few powerful examples. Sue and I have a discussion session a little bit later, and we can talk about what the Los Angeles County Museum has done in this regard, which is extremely effective. This is the new kind of front door for a museum, Chris Burden's great installation in Los Angeles. They go out to the community and curate exhibitions in schools in the deprived community of South Los Angeles. They run a gallery there. They give up some control over their collections and their objects and so forth. They invited, in this case, a Latino artist to curate from the community a great exhibition. But I want to end, of course, on Martin. What the examples I've just shown you and rushed through suggest is that a museum can meet users where they are without the museum losing its noble commitment to preserving stunning works of design and manufacture so that all can enjoy them and use them in the future. Martin strove to meet users where they are because he cared. He will be remembered as a great dashing museum director, but he was a curator at heart. I sought him out in 2012 after I had read his remarks on being the first German director of a major British museum. He laid out his belief that the future of the V&A depended on honoring its historical origins in a progressive social vision for it. The idea that a public museum could educate and delight all people and infuse the country's industries with creative energies. Our conversations over 5 years were among the most memorable I have had about museums. Martin was always thinking his vision out loud. I think you've had this experience. On a sketch pad, drawing triads and squares and bubbles and arrows back and forth and so forth. The terms would change, and I loved listening to them in his wonderful accent. I have an accent too, so I feel entitled to maybe imitate it a bit because he sounded so wonderful. Collections, conservation, visitors, or collections, research, exhibitions, community. All these things moved around, but the vision remained steady, liberating and animating the museum by encouraging curators and conservators to think their hardest about what they had to do for and with people of the past, people of today, and people yet to come. We are forever in his debt, and I'm very glad I had a chance to say a few words about him here.